In the spring of 1954, way up in a remote valley in Vietnam, a single battle didn't just end a war. It literally brought a colonial empire to its knees and, believe it or not, set the stage for an even bigger, more brutal conflict. We're talking about the Battle of Dien Bien Phu.
Just look at this image. This one photo captures the very end of a brutal 56-day siege. You've got the French, a major global military power, being totally and completely defeated by Vietnamese nationalist forces, the Viet Minh. So the big question is, how on earth did a modern, professional army walk straight into a trap that they themselves built?
To really get what happened at Dien Bien Phu, we've got to rewind the clock a bit, back to 1953. The First Indochina War had been dragging on for years, and frankly, it was going terribly for France. They were losing ground, morale was in the gutter, and Paris was getting pretty desperate for any kind of way out.
Now that's some classic diplomatic speak, right? What it really means is, hey, go out there and win us a huge, headline-grabbing victory so we can walk into negotiations looking strong. So the pressure on the commander, General Navarre, was just immense. He needed a game changer, and he needed it yesterday. His solution? A really bold, and as it turns out, a completely fatal gamble.
The French strategy was called the hedgehog concept, and, on paper, it actually sounded kind of brilliant. The plan was to build this giant, fortified base supplied completely by air deep in enemy territory. It was designed to be an irresistible target, basically daring the Viet Minh to attack it. And once they did, the French figured their superior artillery and air power would just annihilate them.
And the French were so confident because this exact strategy had worked for them before. Just a couple of years earlier, at a place called Nha Son, they did something similar and crushed wave after wave of Viet Minh attacks. So they looked at this big, wide-open valley of Dien Bien Phu and thought, perfect, this is going to be Nha Son, but even bigger and better. This was going to be the place they'd finally win the war.
But, and this is a huge but, not everyone was so sure. Right from the very beginning, there were some serious warnings coming from officers who were actually on the ground. General Cogny, he saw the danger clear as day. He realized this valley could easily become a trap, not for the Viet Minh, but for the French themselves. His warning was, well, it was completely ignored by Navarre. The plan went ahead anyway.
So, while the French were busy planning what they thought was the perfect trap, the Viet Minh commander, a man named General Võ Nguyên Giáp, was looking at the exact same valley. And where the French saw bait for his army, he saw the perfect opportunity for a counter-trap.
You see, the French made an absolutely fatal mistake. They just assumed Dien Bien Phu would be Nha Son all over again. But everything was different this time. At Nha Son, the French held the high ground. At Dien Bien Phu, the Viet Minh did. At Nha Son, the French had way more artillery. Here, the Viet Minh would have a 4-to-1 advantage. General Giap had learned his lesson from past defeats, and he was not about to make the same mistake twice.
General Giap himself had this perfect, simple analogy for what was about to happen. He said the French had willingly put themselves in the bottom of a rice bowl, while his army controlled the entire rim, looking down on them from every single direction. I mean, you can just picture it, right? It was a tactical nightmare waiting to happen.
But wait, how did they even get that advantage? How did they get all that heavy artillery into place? Well, this is where the story becomes one of the most incredible logistical feats in military history. The French were absolutely convinced it was impossible to move heavy guns through hundreds of kilometers of thick jungle and mountains. The Viet Minh proved them wrong, using nothing but sheer human power, tens of thousands of porters to literally drag cannons, piece by painful piece, up into the hills.
So, by the time the battle was about to start, the French garrison of about 16,000 soldiers wasn't just facing some ragtag guerrilla force. Nope, they were completely and secretly surrounded by 50,000 Viet Minh troops who were dug into the high ground with more artillery than the French could even imagine. The trap was set.
Then, on March 13, 1954, the quiet in that valley just shattered. The Viet Minh unleashed a massive, totally shocking artillery barrage that instantly destroyed any French ideas of an easy victory.
The French were just stunned. They were outgunned 4-to-1, and these weren't little mortars we're talking about. The Viet Minh had heavy howitzers, many supplied by China, that could just rain down hellfire on any spot in the French camp they wanted.
But it wasn't just about having more guns. It was about the brilliant tactics they used. See, the Viet Minh guns weren't just sitting out in the open. They were dug deep into camouflaged, shell-proof bunkers, firing out of tiny openings that made them nearly impossible for the French to see, let alone hit back.
And at the exact same time, their anti-aircraft guns started hammering the airstrip, threatening to cut off the garrison's one and only lifeline to the outside world.
If you need one single story to understand the absolute shock and despair the French felt, this is it. The French artillery commander, Colonel Puroth, had boldly promised that he would silence the enemy guns in minutes. 2 days later, when he realized his cannons were totally useless against the perfectly hidden Viet Minh positions, the psychological blow was just too much. It was a horrifying sign of the total collapse that was coming.
So after that initial brutal bombardment, the battle changed. It became this grinding, ugly, drawn-out siege. The Viet Minh started to methodically take apart the French defenses, one fortified position at a time.
And man, the collapse of those outer defenses happened shockingly fast. The very first night, strong point Beatrice was gone. A couple of days later, Gabriel was overrun, then Anne-Marie was abandoned. By the end of March, the main airstrip was totally knocked out of action for good. The garrison was now truly, completely trapped.
The fighting then just evolved into something out of World War I, but in a tropical jungle. The Viet Minh dug this incredible network of trenches, zigzagging their way closer and closer to the French lines every single day, just slowly strangling the life out of the garrison. For the soldiers stuck inside, it was a living hell of mud, rain, blood, and non-stop shelling.
And here's the final nail in the coffin. Without the airfield, the only way to get supplies was by parachute. But with the Viet Minh controlling all the hills around them, a lot of those precious supplies, they just drifted down right into enemy territory. The garrison's lifeline was being choked off, and that sealed their fate.
So after 56 days of this relentless, grinding siege, the end was finally here. The French defenders who were left were completely exhausted, they were horribly outnumbered, and they were running out of absolutely everything.
And in this final radio transmission from the command bunker, wow, you can just hear the utter desperation in Commander de Castries' voice. The Viets are everywhere. I feel the end is approaching. But even then, his superior officer in Hanoi tells him, of course you will fight to the end. No surrender.
And that's when Giap ordered the final, massive, all-out assault. More than 25,000 Viet Minh troops stormed the last remaining French positions, which were being held by less than 3,000 exhausted men. The resistance was heroic, but it was hopeless. The central command bunker fell, and just like that, the fighting was over.
The fallout from this one battle was immediate, and it was monumental. The French government in Paris literally resigned. At the peace talks happening in Geneva, France suddenly had zero leverage. They had no choice but to agree to withdraw from Indochina, ending almost 100 years of colonial rule. Vietnam was then temporarily divided in two, which, as we know, set the stage for the next horrible chapter in its history.
And that really leaves us with one last, crucial question to think about. The fall of Dien Bien Phu created a huge power vacuum. That division of Vietnam was never supposed to be permanent, but it quickly became so with a communist North and a US-backed South. So you have to wonder, how did this incredible victory over one global power accidentally pave the way for an even more devastating war with another, just a few years down the road?